Greetings to you and namaskar. Today I want to talk about something that is in the Bible, which Jesus is supposed to have said in the Beatitudes. From the Gospel according to Matthew chapter 5 verse 3. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. This phrase, poor in spirit, has confused many for so long. I know that as a child, I myself have wondered what this meant, and I have struggled with this phrase. It is one thing to imply, as in, say, Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 to 20, that one should not store up treasures on earth so that one may store up treasures in heaven. This I think I can understand and appreciate. But the term poor in spirit seems to indicate someone whose spirit itself is deficient in some way. Many interpretations have been given for this simple statement, conveying a sense of poverty, meekness, humility, submissiveness, sacrifice, and so on. One can understand, perhaps, where these interpretations came from, given that spirituality in many religions has often gone hand in hand with a giving up of wealth and personal assets, donations to poor or to charities, and so on. But something is still not quite right with these explanations. One may be poor terrestrially, but the entire thrust of all spiritual striving is to be wealthy in a spiritual sense, is it not? Or expressed differently, we who are seekers of spiritual truth, we want to be rich in spirit. After all the work that we are doing here on earth to not get lost in worldly riches, we are expecting to be rich spiritually. Is it not a worthy goal to strive to be rich in spirit instead of to be poor in spirit? So why then did Jesus Christ use the term poor in spirit and specifically refer to them as blessed? Today, I want to delve into the real meaning of this according to my own understanding and conviction. And perhaps this will be of use to some of my fellow seekers of the spiritual truth. When Jesus taught, either in his sermons or in his parables, Jesus always spoke from the viewpoint of the spiritual realm, the origin of the human spirit. This location is where the human spirit actually begins its wandering through the creations as a spirit seed. Hence his words always took effect there and were directly applicable to this realm. I personally equate this realm to the causal plane, or also the kingdom of heaven. The interpretation of poverty has unfortunately been ascribed to Jesus for many reasons relating to his personal life. For instance, it is assumed that because his earthly father was a carpenter, he must have been brought up in poverty. Or perhaps because he was born in a stable for animals, because his parents had no place for Mary to rest in Bethlehem, so he must have been poor. Furthermore, it is understood, if we read Matthew chapter 19, verses 16 to 30, that he instructed at least one person, a rich man, who had become spiritually enslaved by his wealth, to give all of his possessions away. All these various stories have given the impression that Jesus favored a life of poverty, or implied that we who are seeking spiritual truths must favor a life of poverty. Yet, it is recorded that Jesus also dined with many rich people, and it is rather doubtful that he instructed all of them to give away their wealth. Moreover, that he was a son of a carpenter does not mean that he was poor. A carpenter's profession was honorable and a profitable one in those days, 2,000 years ago, as it is today in many parts of the world still. And also, that he was born in a manger was an outcome of the circumstances of that time. There was no room for Joseph and his then pregnant wife Mary to stay when they went for the census. It can happen to wealthy people today as well. Hence, the idea that Jesus embraced or even advocated poverty as a part of his teaching is somewhat misguided. I therefore do not believe that Jesus was speaking of poverty here in a physical sense. The phrase poor in spirit, specifically the in spirit part, does not refer to a physical state of poverty. So we can assume that this interpretation is also not in accordance with what Jesus taught. When Jesus spoke of the poor in spirit, he meant an entirely different concept. To be poor means, as per the definition of the word, to have little or no personal possessions. In spirit refers to the spiritual state itself. The spirit of man, the real core of his being, which is referred to in the ancient Vedic texts of India as Atman, is being meant here. Those who are poor in spirit are they who, even at the height of their own development in the spiritual sense, do not consider anything to be their own. Thus, whether on this earth, this coarse material or gross plane, or in the fine material world of the beyond, the world of departed souls, also known as the subtle plane, or in the highest luminous heights of the spiritual paradise, our true home, the causal plane, the kingdom of heaven, as Jesus described it. These spiritual beings have evolved into spiritual personalities who do not make any claim to any part of God's creation, including their own spiritual personalities. They are so poor that they do not claim any ownership of their own spirit, their own being, but they use it as a tool or an instrument of God. They allow their spirits to be used as an instrument of the purest light of God. They make no determination for themselves except what is in accord with God's will or comes from God's will. In other words, these ones have submitted their entire being and nature to God, and regard even their bodies, their cloaks or garments, and so on, and any property entrusted to them, be it land, homes, wealth, or fame, as the unequivocal property of God. they regard themselves as mere administrators of what God has given them, not as proprietors. For God alone is the sole proprietor of everything that is in creation. Thus, to be poor in spirit means to regard that everything that one has, including one's own spiritual personality, as not belonging to oneself, but to God alone. It is these persons who are poor in spirit who will inherit the kingdom of heaven, as Jesus said. For the kingdom of heaven, our eternal home, our paradise, the true Sayujya, only admits such persons. What does it really mean to say that you regard your spiritual personality as not your own, but God's? This means that it is not just your material possessions, but even whatever you think, say, and do. If you can act as if your thoughts are not yours, your words are not yours, and your deeds are not yours, but rather that everything belongs to God, the Creator, then you will only think, speak, and act in the purest and noblest manner. You will only do what is right, and everything you do will be for God and for God alone, even if it is done in the service of others. And the reward for this is the crown of all existence, the kingdom of heaven. This is also what is really meant by renouncing worldly pleasures, which was taught by many sages and prophets, including persons like Gautama Buddha, who had renounced material things. But these persons did not mean that one should renounce the enjoyment of material things per se, but rather that one should renounce all sense of personal ownership of such things, recognizing that all these things, both material and spiritual, belong only to God. At best, we are administrators of these things and must act as thus. And those who are able to carry this out, not only with regards to material things, but also their own spiritual possessions or abilities, their thoughts, words, and deeds, will be freed from that cycle of rebirth. Or in other words, they will have or inherit the kingdom of heaven. In fact, we actually do not have to and should not have to renounce the enjoyment of worldly pleasures. What we should not do, of course, is overindulge them or let them control us. On the other hand, when we are so poor in spirit, then it is imperative for us to become faithful administrators of what belongs exclusively to God. Not just our worldly possessions, such as our houses, cars, money, or whatever else we may have, but our spiritual possessions, our ability to think and form thoughts. For instance, we should administer such that only the purest thoughts ever emerge from us, reflecting God's will and God's love in all things. We then become a continuous joy to all creatures, Now, I recognize that this is hard for us to do. And yes, I find this to be my very own personal challenge in daily life. But Christ did not set the bar low. In fact, in Matthew chapter 5, verse 48, he says to us, "Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect." That is quite a high bar for us human beings, with our many weaknesses and indulgences. We must make a start and cannot shrug our shoulders with the excuse that this is not possible for us to do. If Christ told us to do this, it means we are capable of achieving this goal of spiritual perfection. This is all tied in with the message of Christ. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So, my friends, I do hope that this interpretation of Christ's word strikes a chord within you. If you find resonance therein, I encourage you to pay attention to the source of my inspiration. It is the unique work In the Light of the Truth, written by the German world teacher Abdul Shin, specifically the 1931 edition, which he himself personally published. It is a tremendous work which, in my experience, mediates a cosmic knowledge hitherto not found on this earth. It is from this amazing book that I draw my personal understanding. Originally written in German, it is available also in English. So in conclusion, I want to wish you all a wonderful journey through creation. And knowing and living in the knowledge that God alone is the true owner and sole proprietor of everything, including these very bodies and souls of ours, our very thoughts, words, and deeds. May we then find the way to inherit the kingdom of heaven that Jesus promises us. And please, let us respect one another in love and harmony, at whatever stage of spiritual development each of us may be. And I look forward to our journey upwards to the light. Thank you.